What's going on, guys? It's Alex TextK and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about troubleshooting common competition pistol issues. I've ran into a handful myself, and over my many years of shooting, I have found a routine that allows me to keep my firearms functioning at 100% no matter how far I'm traveling to shoot them. Because a small malfunction in the middle of a match in competition can be extremely frustrating and derail your progress throughout a match very quickly, especially if it becomes something that is not a quick fix. So in this video, I'm going to talk about three major things because these are the things that I have seen and or ran into in my experience that I have created a routine to work around proactively by maintaining peak performance of my firearms against these issues that I've actually ran into, not just theoretical ones. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is going to be common sight problems. And I'm going to talk about the three ones that I have personally experienced and how I combat them today. The first issue was iron sights completely leaving the gun, just deciding they didn't want to be here anymore. They wanted to go home, wherever home is. Apparently it was the ground. And I'm going to wrap that in also with the fiber optic flying out just the same. Now, the sight completely disappearing is a complete detriment. The fiber optic disappearing, you still have a front sight post that you can still work off, so it's a little bit less of an issue. My DWX here blew that sight off within the first 1,000 rounds, and Dan Wesson wasn't going to send me another one. So, not that I've put a new one on now because this gun does run only a dot, and I do not use the front sight post at all. I bought backup iron sights as well as a small sight pusher tool. The sight pusher tool will also roll into number two, which is going to be misaligned iron sights. Usually you can kind of tell by looking at the top of your firearm whether or not those sights have been pushed one way or another if you really look at it, but sometimes you can't, especially when you get out to that 25, 30 yard distance. And obviously that bleeds kind of right into if your red dot is off a little bit. And what I do with that is the same thing that I would recommend you do with your iron sights, which is every time I start a practice session, I always put a target out as far as I can, or at least 25 yards, 20, 25 yards, and I will put a little black sticker right on the middle. Either put the gun on a rest, a bag, or otherwise, and I will just take 2 to 3 super slow, super calm shots. I will go down and check to make sure that at distance I am on, and then we can begin the training session because I do not want to have to think about the firearm itself when I'm out there working. The last thing is going to be optic screws. Anytime I go to take my gun out of the bag, I always, like anybody, you check it, you check it's clear. I rack it probably 10, 15 times. One, because it's almost like therapeutic to me. But two, I'm also checking my optic. So when I rack these, I put my thumb in front of the optic and I will sit there at the safe table and just go. So what I did there is I put stress on the optic, simulating shooting prior to beginning shooting, as well as pushing on it physically in the front, and then wiggling it left to right before I holster the gun up, just to make sure that everything is secure. I have seen optics shear off in the middle of matches, and the majority of the time that does happen, like you'll see right here, is when either you have the wrong screws in the wrong threads and or they were not tight enough to where they loosened up enough to shear the whole thing clean off, and or shearing your optic screws, which will obviously skyrocket the optic somewhere else or right in the face. I've had them both. So all in all, on sights, keep backup iron sights if you shoot irons, a sight pusher tool, keep a extra fiber optic in your bag, and all you need for that is a pair of snips and a lighter. And it is extremely, extremely simple to take care of. And the last thing would be making sure that you check your optics, iron sights or otherwise, before you start any training session. That way, when you get to the match, you are good, and always making sure your optic screws are nice and tight. Make sure that optic is always nice and sturdy on there. Check it. It does not hurt to take seconds to check these things before you begin shooting. That way, if you do keep these parts and or backup things on hand, you can fix those before getting derailed in the middle of your match. The second thing I want to talk about is a slight touch on grip and handling issues. If you are unaware of what limp wristing is a very easy way to cause either a double feed, a failure to extract, or a stovepipe. And it comes down to being pretty much this simple because it's basically just physics, momentum, and inertia. As you have a good solid grip on the gun cycles in the slide, pulls back, the extractor releases the old casing, and it slams the new round into chamber so you can repeat the cycle. With a limp wrist, as the gun cycles back, the gun also rolls back. Now, with the bullet needing to be fed into the chamber that way and it leading this way, gravity is not always your friend. And on top of that, you are adding an extra rotating dynamic that is throwing off the hard hit that is supposed to be ripping out an old casing and putting in a new round every single time. So don't limp wrist the gun. Make sure you practice that good sturdy grip and make sure that you're not loosening up as you shoot, because that is something that I know I've had to work through many a times in my early years and even to this day. Sometimes I loosen up a little bit as I start running around, and I am actively and consciously always trying to make sure that I keep as tight of a grip on that gun for the entirety of whatever I'm happen to be shooting at that time. The second thing I want to touch on is going to be riding the slide with your thumb. So you'll notice here I have these fancy gas pedals on my shadows, and here on the DWX I actually have a Range Panda hammerhead that I'm going to end up drilling into the frame here because nobody has come out with a slide stop thumb rest yet. Look at where my thumb is because I have massive hands. When I am riding high and tight on the gun, my thumb is actually contacting the slide. And I run into that problem a little bit with the DWX here in shooting it, in which I start to feel my thumb really pushing and rubbing up against that slide. Thankfully, it is so smooth, but when these serrations make their way back to my thumb, I constantly am missing skin on the front of my thumb because of it. And on top of that, I have caused an out of battery malfunction before because of pushing a little bit too hard on that. There's guys out there who don't even run a gas pedal. They simply run something called a shield, which is the inside piece here with no ledge on the side so that they have something to push their thumb against so they don't interrupt the cycle of the slide. Now we can get all pretty in depth when it comes to the gripping stuff, especially as an instructor. A target will always tell a story, but what I'm speaking about here is considering everything else was perfect and the only issues was these in particular isolated things that we are speaking about. The last and most major thing that I have run into, and I have solved over 50 people's problems in the last 8 to 10 months since this happened to me, is failure to extract due to lack of maintenance. And we're not talking springs or anything like that. We are simply talking how often you clean your gun and how you do it based on the type of firearm that you have. With things like this here being CZ75s, 1911, 2011, your tighter tolerance, and more commonly your metal guns, but not to be excluded from your MMPs, Walther PDP, PDP steels, which is metal, but their polymers just the same. They all have their own quirks, and I've noticed these things come into play regardless of the platform that I am running that day. So firstly, I will tell you that I clean my guns thoroughly, minimum of once a week. I run them all. They all get shot multiple times a week. They get dry fired on the daily basis. Not that emits dirt, but it is still moving parts. And if there's any dirt or grime in there when I'm doing that from a previous training session, all I'm doing is moving it around anyway. But I clean them extremely religiously. And if you guys would like to see how I go about that process, I'd be happy to do that for you. Just let me know in the comments below. But last year, 2024, at Area 8 Championship, the night before I was out training before heading south, when my Shadow 2, and at the time I only had this one did not exist yet, started having major failure to extract issues, starting with 1 in every 100 rounds to 2 to 3 per magazine. And although I stuck a brush in there, I bore snaked it and everything, it still did not fix the problem. So what was my solution and how did I come to it? The solution turned out to be simply keeping my feed ramp and my chambers polished on all 3 of these firearms. Since doing that, I have not had one single failure to extract in the last probably 30,000 rounds since that happened. But as you see me doing here, I literally take a polishing wheel on a Dremel and I clean out the chamber and the feed ramp religiously. This is how I clean my barrels weekly, which has emitted zero failure to extract problems over the last 8-9 months and 30,000 plus rounds on these firearms. And prior to this happening, I still clean them weekly. But I didn't go in there and use a wheel to get out all of that burnt off residue that was caked up inside of that chamber. Understand that wiping it with a cloth and spraying some gun cleaner on it is not going to get every bit of everything. This stuff gets really, really hot. It is a controlled detonation, and it is just like smoke. It will stain, but you can get it out. If you let that stain continue, you are closing up the tolerancing on the inside of that chamber, which as that casing goes to get pulled out, it's going to start angling and dragging on this gritty surface, which in turn is going to cause the extractor to slip. The extra precautionary measure that I did take to this was also shaving off 0.02 millimeters off of the contact face of the extractor where it actually contacts the slide itself. That way, and virtually, as you'll see here, like imagine my finger is the extractor in the same plane as the gun here. I took off from this face right here so that that extractor would bite just a little bit harder. That way it wouldn't slip as easily, just in case that residue were to add up over the course of, say, a 3-day weekend like Handgun Nationals. But all in all, I can elaborate a lot more on this stuff, and if you guys per request would like for me to, I'd be more than happy to. But let's run down the list real quick, all right? So, sights. Keep backup iron sights, a sight pusher tool, as well as making sure your red dot optic screws are Loctited with blue at the least, or purple, not red, and torqued to spec. Make sure that you do that and check it every time you pull out the firearm. Checking your sights every time you pull out the firearm. And keeping a fiber optic, pair of snips, and a lighter on hand in your bag so that you can fix any problem you may come across with your sights. As far as grip and handling, don't limp wrist the gun. Don't ride the slide with your thumb. And lastly, making sure the gun runs at peak performance is really what it is, and making sure that you keep that chamber, extraction area, and feed ramp really nice and clean anytime you're about to take it out, especially with these tight toleranced firearms. But all in all, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you got something from this today. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Let me know what more you guys would like to see. But this is Alex Tex Kate signing off, and I will see you guys next week.